In the Smithsonian's Agricultural History Collection, there's a set of drawings for a machine that most people walk straight past. It doesn't look dramatic. Wheels, a blade, a reel, a wooden platform. But according to agricultural historians, this single machine is one of the reasons the American Midwest could feed a continent at all. On a summer afternoon in 1831, in Rockbridge County, Virginia, a young farmer walked a horse-drawn machine into a field of ripe wheat. By hand, one stroke at a time, that was the only way a field like that could be harvested before that afternoon. In the next few minutes, you'll see exactly why that limit existed, how one farmer's machine broke it, and why the same basic mechanism is still cutting crops today. This is documented agricultural history, patent records, Smithsonian archives, and university agricultural history collections. Sit with that for a second. A machine so ordinary looking that most museum visitors walk past it without a glance. It starts with a problem that had nothing to do with how much land a farmer owned. Before mechanical reapers, wheat was cut with a cradle scythe, a long curved blade with wooden fingers attached, swung by hand. A skilled worker, historians estimate, could cut somewhere around 2 acres of wheat in a full day of brutal continuous labor. Here's the strange part. Almost nobody expects. The real limit on a farm's size wasn't the soil, or the rainfall, or even the seed. It was how many acres a farmer and his hired hands could physically cut before the grain shattered and fell to the ground on its own. Ripe wheat doesn't wait. Once it's ready, there's a narrow window before the grain drops out of the head and the whole crop is lost standing in the field. So a farmer could clear as much land as he wanted, plant as much wheat as he wanted, and it made no difference if he couldn't cut it all in time. Farms across the country were quietly capped by a bottleneck that had nothing to do with ambition. A farmer could own 300 acres of the richest soil in the county and still only ever plant and harvest a fraction of it. Hiring extra hands for harvest season helped, but only so much. Skilled cradle work was exhausting, and the window to get it all done was measured in days, not weeks. What the region actually needed wasn't more farmland. It needed more hours in the harvest window, and the machine that would eventually solve that problem had already failed more than once in other inventors' hands. Here's the part most people never hear about, who actually got there first. Cyrus McCormick wasn't the only person trying to mechanize the harvest in the early 1800s. Several earlier inventors had attempted horse-drawn cutting machines, and most of them ran into the same handful of problems. The detail almost no one mentions is how specific those failures actually were. Some designs jammed constantly on uneven ground. Others cut wheat but left it scattered in a tangle no one could gather efficiently. Some simply couldn't cut cleanly at all. Records from agricultural historians describe decades of these attempts, most abandoned after a single disappointing season in the field. Notice what's actually going on here. The idea of a mechanical reaper wasn't the hard part. Building one that survived a real field was. McCormick's own father, Robert McCormick, had spent years trying to build a working reaper himself, without success. What no one expected was that the son would solve it within a matter of seasons. In 1834, Cyrus McCormick patented an improved version of the reaper he had first successfully demonstrated 3 years earlier, in 1831. Here's the part most retellings skip about that very first demonstration. By most historical accounts, the demonstration wasn't flawless. The machine reportedly needed adjustment mid-field to keep working, but it finished the job a hand crew couldn't have matched. And it worked, by fixing 3 specific problems that had defeated nearly every attempt before it. The first was a reel, a simple rotating arm that gently pulled standing wheat back against the cutting blade, instead of letting it fall away untouched. The second was the cutting blade itself, a reciprocating knife that sawed back and forth through a row of fixed guard fingers, so the wheat was held steady exactly where it was being cut. The third was a divider, a simple blade at the edge of the machine that cleanly separated the wheat being cut from the wheat still standing. Individually, none of these 3 ideas sounds like much. Together, they solved the exact 3 failures that had stopped every reaper before it. Here's a detail worth pausing on. None of these 3 ideas were entirely new inventions on their own. What made McCormick's version different was how precisely they were combined to work as a single system, not 3 separate fixes bolted together. We dig through the patent archive so you don't have to, Subscribe for documented history. Here's where the story usually stops in most retellings, but it doesn't stop there. A horse pulled the whole assembly forward, while a single operator walked alongside, raking the cut wheat off the platform in bundles. What had required a full crew of men with scythes now needed one horse and one or two workers. Agricultural historians commonly cite a rough comparison that still holds up, where a skilled man with a cradle scythe could cut about 2 acres a day. McCormick's reaper could cut somewhere around 10 to 12. Stop and think about what that actually means for a farm. A farm that used to need 6 or 7 men swinging scythes from dawn to dusk could now bring in the same harvest with a horse, a machine, and a couple of workers. The same harvest window that used to cap a farm at a few dozen acres could now support several times that without adding a single extra worker. The stranger fact is that McCormick wasn't even first to patent a working reaper. A rival inventor, Obed Hussey, patented his own mechanical reaper in 1833, a full year before McCormick's 1834 patent. For years, the two men and their machines were in direct competition, each claiming the superior design. The rivalry became personal and very public. Public reaping contests were staged where the two machines competed head-to-head in front of crowds of farmers. But that's not even the part of this story that changed American farming the most. For its first years, McCormick's reaper was built in small numbers, largely by hand in Virginia. In 1847, McCormick moved his manufacturing to Chicago, a decision that changed the entire trajectory of the machine. Chicago put him at the center of railroad lines and waterways reaching directly into the expanding wheat country of the Midwest. Here's the part that most people still get wrong about how this actually scaled. It wasn't a single brilliant machine that transformed American farming. It was that machine, mass-produced, reaching exactly the region that needed it most. Within a few decades, McCormick's reapers and machines built on the same core mechanism were working fields across the entire American Midwest. What no one expected was how directly this connected to the region's explosive growth as wheat country. The same prairie land that had been considered barely farmable a generation earlier was now producing at a scale that fed cities hundreds of miles away. The company Cyrus McCormick, built in Chicago, eventually became one of the founding pieces of International Harvester in 1902, a name that would dominate American farm equipment for most of the next century. Here's the part worth knowing. If you've ever watched a modern combine harvester at work, here's the last piece of this most retellings skip entirely. That reciprocating knife, sawing back and forth through fixed guard fingers, is still the basic cutting mechanism used in hay mowers and combine headers built today. Notice what actually survived nearly 2 centuries here. Not the horse, not the wooden platform, not even the company name, just the specific mechanical idea of a blade held steady by fingers, moving back and forth through standing grain. Every combine rolling through a wheat field today is, in a very real mechanical sense, still doing what that 1831 machine in Rockbridge County first proved could be done. A labor ceiling that had capped farm size for generations didn't get solved by more workers. It got solved by 3 simple ideas, built well enough to survive a real field. Think about how rare that actually is. A fix from 1831 still doing its exact original job inside a machine built 2 centuries later. That's the real story, documented and still cutting through wheat fields every single harvest. If you want more of these, the real engineering behind the machines that built American farming, subscribe to The Quiet Farmer. And tell us in the comments, have you ever seen a working reaper or an antique combine in person?